worked at a foundation maybe 3 or 4 months after graduating from college. And I was the only person of color in this particular organization. And I think at that time, I'm still like incredibly young. I'm 21, 22 years old. And I think that I am for sure going to have an impact on the world. And I didn't understand office politics. I didn't understand microaggressions. And even though I couldn't identify or understand it, I felt it in my body.
Hello and welcome to Working Your Way, the podcast dedicated to exploring the journey of authenticity in the workplace and discovering how to navigate it your way. I'm your host, Sandhya Sadakar, and this week we are revisiting one of our earlier episodes with my guest, Dr. Patrice Johnson. She's the president and CEO of Project Scientist, an educational nonprofit delivering high-quality experiences in the fields of science, technology, engineering, arts, and math to underserved and marginalized girls. Now, I think this episode needs a re-listen for a couple of reasons. First, we're in a moment in time with a U.S. presidential candidate who is female and of Black and Indian descent. Now, regardless of your political views or your perspectives on any policies, this moment is objectively groundbreaking and historic. I found myself at times overwhelmed emotionally at the meaning of this moment, seeing representation that I have never seen for South Asian women or women of color in this country in general. And representation matters so much. And we still need more systemic change to create a more equitable path to big opportunities for those who lack access to them today. And what Dr. Patrice and her team at Project Scientist are doing is a beautiful example of just that. Paving the path for better representation in STEM fields by creating new routes of access and opportunity. And the other big reason that I wanted to revisit this episode today is that we don't always get to hear stories from leaders who are leading with empathy and those who are really caring for the people in their organizations. Dr. Patrice is such a great role model for this, and she prioritizes caring for herself in the midst of all that she's doing. I hope you can listen and come away with some inspiration and some intention to lead better and to prioritize your own well-being, because that's the only way that we can make a big impact, be successful, and do it all in a way that's actually sustainable. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Welcome, Dr. Patrice Johnson. I am so excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here, excited to chat with you and speak to your audience today.
I'm going to throw a little curveball at you when we start. On your website, so it's public information, you guys have the cutest thing where your team, when you scroll over their pictures, it says what you all wanted to be growing up, what you wanted to be when you grow up. And yours says you want to be a lawyer by day and a pop star by night.
Absolutely. I wanted to give Janet Jackson and Beyonce a run for their money. Okay.
Yes.
That was the plan. I don't know what happened between now and then. It's more than likely that I don't have the gift of singing, right? If I knew how to sing, I would not be here. Okay. I can dance a little bit and that's not a problem. But the fact that I cannot sing whatsoever is the only reason why I don't have the album of the year this year.
Fair. So your aspiration is totally doable. It's just that unfortunately your vocal cords are just not cooperating.
They're not cooperating with me, right? I might need to do Milli Vanilli, pull that off. But in the event that I get blessed with some vocal coaching, it's a wrap. for everybody, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Watch out, everyone. You all heard it here first.
Yes,
You're
buy my
lucky.
album. My album will come out around May or April of this year. Be ready.
I love it. I love it. Big dreams, and you're doing amazing things. So
Thank you.
let's talk a little bit about, before we really get into your role at Project Scientist, I
Hmm.
want to talk about your career leading up to that. So can you
Hmm.
share a little bit about what were like kind of the big career steps that you took to get where you are?
So I feel so incredibly fortunate because my career journey, at every stage, I was always doing something that I was passionate about, which I think contributes to the success in my career. If I can even, well, yeah, I'm going to own that, right? I think we struggle with not owning success. I'm going to own it. But I
Yeah.
think the reason why throughout my career I've been able to, at every level, see impact is because I was passionate about the work, right? So I started out, what I would consider my real first job, the job that I loved, was at my old high school. So the same school that I was, freshman, sophomore, bubbly 15-year-old girl, I went back and worked at that high school. And that was at a time where the state was taking over school districts because of financial deficits. And that was the case in my alma mater. And I was committed to rebuilding that school district. And in my little corner of the world, I worked at the high school, but I worked really closely with the principal at the time. And we wanted to restore that culture and that pride. And so I think I was successful because there was a mission, right? And this is early in my career. And I think that value of having mission driven work played itself out, right? And so I worked with students who, at Job Corps, right, who the world would say, you can't cut it in a normal high school. So we're sending you to Job Corps, where these are gifted students who just needed a second chance, right? So again, this is mission driven work. So I was committed to seeing these young people transform their lives, and then going from there to come into Detroit and leading a nonprofit that focused on girls and girl leadership and finding this holistic residential care for girls who may have had housing instability, right? And still working with young people. That is all mission driven work. And I think to credit success is because the root of that success is about mission. And so you kind of, you don't just go to sleep at night because you're thinking about all these other things. That's different than perhaps working in a corporate space and you don't really care if the Pepsi bottle is in the storage, right? Not saying that that work isn't important, because if you like Pepsi, that's important work, right? You want your Pepsi in, or your Reese's cup somewhere. But it's a
Exactly.
it's a different type of, you show up differently when you're fighting for something, right? And I think I've been really fortunate to lead a career where all of my work has been mission driven.
I love this idea of attributing success to that like passion, the fire
Mm-hmm.
to do something, the care, right? The deep
Yeah.
care for the work
Yeah.
that you're doing. And there's like, this idea of like our work can be a job, a career, or a calling. And when it's a job, it's just a means
Yeah.
to survive, which is also very fair. If it's a career, our job is a means to get somewhere, whether it's like furthering our expertise in a field or something like that. And when it's a calling,
Mm-hmm.
our job is a means to our impact in the world. And
Yes. Yeah.
it feels like it was that for you really from the start.
100%. 100%. And I honestly think that that is a blessing, because everybody doesn't get to go to work and feel good about the work that they do, right? I mean, I remember working at Subway in high school, right? And it's Subway. I'm putting sandwiches together. Again, people got to eat, right? People got to eat. But I get to go to work and see people impacted in a significant way.
I certainly think we can frame our work in any way that is more or less meaningful to us, no matter what we're doing, whether it's running a country or making a sandwich. And it's like, it's how important is it to us, right? What do we see that outcome
Mhm.
is? And I love that. So, what do you think it is about your passion for the purposes that you've worked on that led you to success? What's the connection between that fuel and the outcomes?
It's for sure my own experiences, right? So for my freshman year of college, I was always inclined to policy and politics in a community way and curious about my environment. But then my freshman year of college, I read Faces at the Bottom of the Well by Derek Bell, which is a critical race theory scholar. He is a critical race theory legal scholar. And I was like, oh my God, this is basically what my city looks like. This is what my community looks like. I just didn't know the right terms. So all of a sudden, I now understand what inequity looks like. I now can understand why my school did not have the same resources as this shiny school 2, 3 blocks away or across the tracks, right? And I think that made me angry. And then there was a sense of righteous indignation, right? Which is essentially the thing that lights the fire. And it makes you want to rectify or bring justice into the world. And that too has been proven throughout my work, right? Because my research was about structural racism in urban education. And I wanted to understand how is it that, my school district only gets $7,000 per pupil and another school gets $13,000 per pupil, right? And I think living in systems of inequity, I got to understand them and put definition to it when I got to college. And that, again, I think that's what sparked the fuel. And inequity in all types of forms, right? I think initially I began to think about racial inequity. And then I said, I'm a woman. Wait a minute. And I began to experience things based off of my gender identity, right? And so the intersection of race, class, and gender and how that affects people's material reality, the way that they are able to afford a house, what jobs they select, what educational systems they engage in, right? And when you see the injustice in the fact that race, gender, and class really determines your material outcome in life, right? It determines whether or not you can achieve generational wealth. It determines whether or not you go to Harvard or you go to community college, where you grow up, and the identities that you possess affect your material reality.
Yeah. And it's kind of this exponential with each step, more opportunities open up or don't open up. And then it's like you have now this kind of compounded effect of each step that somebody has taken and whether they've had access to things or not. I've heard, the saying of like talent is evenly distributed, but opportunity is not.
Yes. 100%. I love that. Repeat that 2 more times.
Yeah, we'll say it a little louder for the people in the back, right?
Yes.
I want to pause here for a moment to talk about intersectionality. If you've done any reading on equity or maybe DEI trainings in your job, you hopefully are familiar with this term already. Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, who's a scholar and an activist, first used this term in the late 80s to describe how the layers of our social identity overlap. Things like race, gender, physical abilities, socioeconomic status, and how the overlaps of these things impact the way that we experience the world. For example, all women don't experience the world in the same way. A Black woman will have a very different lived experience than a white woman, or a woman born into a high socioeconomic status or a wealthy family will have a very different lived experience than a woman born into poverty. And as we continue to layer these parts of our identity, the advantages or disadvantages can stack up significantly. And more specifically, these layers of our identity impact how much we're advantaged or disadvantaged by a lot of the social systems in our country. Patrice mentioned things like which schools get funded based on who they serve. We can also look at things like laws. When women got the right to vote, did that impact everyone equally, regardless of race or class? No, there still were a lot of barriers for a lot of women that were subgroups within the group of women as a whole. And while some of these things go fairly far back in history, in the workplace, intersectionality is still really front and center. If we look at pay equity statistics from recent years, we'll see that women still make an average of 82 cents for every dollar that a man makes for the same work and the same qualifications. And even worse, Black women make 63 cents for every dollar, and Latina women make 58 cents for every dollar. So you can see the impact when we look at not only gender, but gender layered with race. And this is a very real impact of intersectionality. And it's why it's important to think about it in other areas of our workplaces as well. One example is in ERGs, or employee resource groups, or sometimes they're called affinity networks. Does your company's women's network take an intersectional approach to its work? Or is it ignoring that different women have different additional layers of challenges that they have to overcome and treating all women the same? How could you take an intersectional approach, maybe starting with understanding what are the unique needs of the different subgroups within the group that you're trying to support? So along that route of kind of doing work and being successful in your career, like fueled by really this ideal to make things better, were there points along that where you felt like you couldn't be authentic at work, and what was that like?
So the worst job I've ever had, which is why I don't know if I count it as my first job, but I worked at a foundation maybe 3 or 4 months after graduating from college. And I was the only person of color in this particular organization. And I think at that time, I'm still like incredibly young. I'm 21, 22 years old. And I think that I am for sure going to have an impact on the world. And I didn't understand office politics. I didn't understand microaggressions. And even though I couldn't identify or understand it, I felt it in my body. And it made me doubt my capabilities, and it undermined my confidence. And so experiencing that, I could not be my authentic self in that. It wasn't a safe space, right? Which I think now I am clear on creating a safe space for the people that are in my professional care.
So what happened after you left that job? Then you went from the worst job, we won't even call it a job, we'll call it the first,
Yeah.
a middle step, right?
Yeah. Right.
Into this job that you loved. Tell me about the transition.
Confidence was an immediate thing when people can have a conversation with you and immediately see that you're gifted, right? Or you're able to solve problems without a blink. It's common sense that you could think strategically. And I think I was the type of person where, again, because it was mission driven work for me, I hustled around the work that I needed to do, right? There was no, if you called me and said, Patrice, we got to get this done right now. Cool, fine, let's get it done. And I think that type of hustle in that environment definitely created more skills and more confidence that first job that I did not like was the only time I held a job that would be considered not senior leadership, which is crazy to me now that I think about it. Like, crazy. I was a 22-year-old, 23-year-old, just out of college. And that was the only job I would consider was an entry level job for me. After that, it was like, I was either on an executive leadership team or I was a CEO or an executive director, right? So it's just crazy that you go from a place where there's the microaggressions and there's the tension, and to go to another space that was very welcoming and that can recognize gifts, and then to catapult my career that I never went back to what was considered an entry level job. It's crazy to me.
It's pretty wild. And I think coming from an environment where not only do you not really feel seen and valued, but you're actually you're experiencing discrimination, right? Microaggressions, call them whatever we want. It is
Yeah.
overt discrimination. It's like chipping away at you every day, right? And it was chipping away at your probably energy and
Yeah.
sense of self and your confidence. And then you went into a job that saw you, and not only saw you, they were like put you up on their shoulders, and they were like,
Mhm.
you are amazing, like, go
Mhm.
do your thing.
Mhm.
A lot of people might have gone into that, the first week, the first month, the first year of that next job, maybe not fully contributing or holding things back or constantly
Mhm.
doubting themselves. Did you
Mhm.
have a period of that, or was it like, this mission is here, I'm going to use the hustle and
Yeah.
until I can, get the evidence that they see me here?
Yeah. You know, that's an interesting question. And honestly, I remember the very first day, and the principal said to me, "You're going to be my right hand woman," essentially. And I think that there is some humility that came with that as well. It didn't care if you needed me to help write a school improvement plan and or clean out the gym. Humility does not come easy. I think it's a gift,
Yeah.
that sometimes has to be worked through you, right? And you have to pursue it every day. But I think in that role, there was a good balance between, yeah, I have the skill, but there was also this space of humility and service, right? And service. And I think that kind of carried me through.
Yeah, I think there has to be a pretty profound impact to work for a leader who's like, I need you in my corner, like you're my person.
Mhm.
For me, I would inspire something in me to like go the extra
Yeah.
mile all the time, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So you're now the executive director of Project Scientist. And so tell
Mhm.
me a little bit about the mission and how it ties into kind of, your research and the inequities that you've
Mhm.
seen and been working to combat.
So, Project Scientist has been around for 10, 11 years now. And our mission is essentially, it's very clear. We want to help girls build the confidence in their leadership journey to pursue STEM careers. And I want to say STEAM careers, right? So oftentimes we leave out the arts, right?
Mm.
And I think the beauty in that work is helping girls see themselves as genius. If you can imagine what you think a genius is or who we've heard about being a genius, we think of Albert Einstein, right? When that word has been used, is sparingly used to recognize women, and in particular, women of color, right? And so I appreciate the mission of Project Scientist being able to say that there are girls who look like you and they are genius, and they can create things, and they can create solutions that help us live in a more equitable world, right? I mean, jokingly, I've been talking about I really want someone to create a hair scarf that allows my hair not to sweat when I go to the gym. Nobody has been able to figure that out yet. It really frustrates me that a person who loves to go to the gym, but you got to calculate your hair schedule around going to the gym. I need a student who understands hair to figure this out. To me, that's a genius. you know,
Truly, truly.
you know what I mean?
I can relate so much to the like, I don't think men will ever understand, most of them, the calendaring that goes into like, when am I
Yeah.
going to work out? When am I going to wash my hair? What do I have to do the next 3 days after that? It's
Yes.
like, it's a
Yes.
whole process. It's a whole
It's a
process.
process. It's a process. But, so I joke about that, but I really like, come on, y'all got to figure this out. But I also think we have girls in our program who are curious about the way things work, right? And who are interested in climate justice. And what does it look like for us to, like, for example, right now they have a class called Wacky Weather, and they are learning how to engineer material in a way that it can sustain storms, right?
Mm.
So our bridges, and we think about the levees in New Orleans. Like, how are we protecting our environment from Mother Nature that we are throwing completely off? She is upset with us when we talk about climate change and things of that nature. But thinking about our students in a way that they will begin to create the next best thing, right? And part of our work is not just that they are creating the next invention that helps protect my hair, but that they are also creating things that are around equity and justice, right? And that is really important to us in our work. So I have an amazing team who is also very mission driven. And our goal is to support 10,000 girls annually in the next 3 to 5 years. And we're excited about that work. We're in it for the long haul.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. And I think, we take for granted just how much science and technology impact every single day and profoundly impact the future of the planet and our own futures and our own lives. And so having the lived experience that represents the population of the world, having representation in those fields is
Yes.
so critical. Yeah. So tell me about your role as a leader. One of the things that you said before was people who are under your professional care. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that is such an interesting perspective on
Mm-hmm.
leadership and one that I think is really beautiful. So say a little bit more about that.
Sure. So I'm thinking about my team and not just this team, but I have folks throughout my career that I still keep in contact with. And it's almost like a nurturing element, which is crazy surprising because I have no children. I have 2 dogs. I will probably have children one day. I don't have them right now. But I think that whether my team is with me today or they decide tomorrow they want to go and do something different, I would hope that their experience with me helps to grow them professionally and personally, and that they feel like, you know what, I'm bad at this. Bad as in good, right?
Yeah.
And I can conquer whatever, right? I think because of my experience working with folks who may not have been the best leaders, it's important to me that people leave their experience under my leadership feeling confident in their capacity, right? And their capabilities. And feeling that their life outside of work also matters, right? That who they are as a person when they bring themselves to work, that it matters, right? Because often, and we see this so much with corporations right now, that they're doing these massive layoffs and there is no soul in the work environment, right?
No.
And even when you have to make tough decisions, how do you do that with empathy and having a space where you cultivate a safe environment for folks to bring their authentic self, right? And so I've got this really cool skill where I can look at somebody on my team and I can recognize if they're sick, if they're not feeling it today, you know, and opening up the space to say, what's going on, right? And because I think we start with that, we start with understanding one another, having some empathy, and building relationship intentionally, work product and the results, they come naturally, right? It's easy for us to have a conversation about producing the results that we need when we've aligned on the human level, right? I think you get the best out of folks when you can see them in their authentic self, right? And you don't put them in a box that is transactional to say, I just need you to do X, Y, and Z, and then I'm done, right? As long as you do X, Y, and Z, I'm done. And that is not, I don't want to work in that type of environment, right? I want to work in a space where not only are we transforming the business or the organization, but we're transforming the people that we serve and we're transforming the people that work with us. And I think it's important to me. I often tell the team the world by itself is something else. I mean, if you went right now and looked at New York Times or CNN or MSNBC, there is something sad. There is something tragic happening in our world every single day. But you're going to spend 40 hours a week with me. And in that time, I want to center joy because you're going to spend more time with me than you're going to spend with your loved ones, right? And if that's the case, then I want us to have a good time.
Outside of kind of the instance in your career where you didn't get any of this,
Mm.
what were the influences along the way that formed who you are as a leader and how you lead?
I'm definitely a much better leader now than I was before. I mean, if you could talk to some of the first couple of teams that I led, they would say, "Oh, she need work here," right? So I think it is leaning into growth over time. I think that there are some elements in my upbringing around, I had some really phenomenal father figures, right? Who, like I always talk about Robert Moore, who was my band director, right? And there were not a lot of girl drum majors in bands at the time. And he made me a drum major in middle school and in high school. But more importantly, he really taught me how to be a good leader, right? You show up on time, you lead by example, you service oriented. He taught those attributes, right? And I think that stuck with me. So I have to give him the credit for that.
Yeah. And then, as you said, you maybe weren't the leader you are today when you very first stepped
Oh,
into this
yeah.
role. And so, leaning into your own growth and being somebody who has this huge mission and probably a lot of things to do in a day, how do you make the time to and make the space to invest in your own growth as a leader?
So I think at this point, it's more about self awareness, right? So
Mm.
I don't think that it's in a book. Well, it is in a book, right? You can
There are
definitely
many of them, but
don't get me wrong. There are some great leadership
yeah.
books that you can, but there is nothing, and I got a whole doctorate degree, and I can tell you that stuff is great to know, but when you get into the thick of it, there is an intersection between theory and practice. And so
Yes.
in this reality as a leader now, my board chair is not going to call me and say, "Oh, Patrice, I heard you ran that meeting terrible." That's not happening. It is the self awareness coupled with the courage to be willing to say you were wrong,
Yeah.
or, "Man, I should have done that better." And then you do it again next time. So, one of the things I do with my teams is the CEO hot seat, right? And this is, what do I need to stop, start, or continue? And there have been some really cute, continues, but some of the stops are out there, right? Like,
Mm.
I have been called out plenty of time to say, "Ooh, I didn't notice that. Let me fix that." And then being intentional about being better, right? And honestly, if I could give this, you're not asking me for my advice. If I can give this advice, I think you have to be intentional about every team that you manage. Like the team that I lead right now, I show up differently for that team than I did my last team, right? Because people are different and they all have different needs. And so I think being intentional about, the CPO needs something different than my chief of staff, right?
Yeah.
And finding a way to give them what they need via intentionality. But I think the growth, to answer your original question, stems from self awareness, like being able to check yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what you said is spot on. It's like it should be highlighted and put on a billboard. You can read 8,000 leadership books, but if you're not actually practicing the
Yeah.
things, right? And these are not checklists of things like ask everybody
Hmm.
how they're actually, this is funny. My friend, she like stitched this video where, a male podcaster was saying the thing that you can do to make sure that your team feels cared for is call every person and ask them how they're doing. And
Hmm.
she's like, you get a podcast for that? Like, what?
Yeah.
Seriously? That's what
Yeah.
that's the genius idea that you came up with? Like, that's just being human, right?
That's just
And
being
so
human.
you don't need to check that off a list to have a top 10 things of how to be a good leader. It's like just
Hmm.
being who
Yep.
you are if you genuinely care.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. And
Yeah.
honestly, I think people can tell if you are checking off a box or not, right? Like
Yeah.
whether it's, and that definitely sounds like a check mark versus the genuine connection.
I
Yeah.
love the CEO hot seat. I think it's something too where I think that is successful for you because you've created an environment of trust. because a lot of
Mm-hmm.
CEOs could say, I want to hear what I need to do better. And
Mm-hmm.
people will sit there with their lips zipped up,
Oh,
and not share.
yeah. And that's a sign of a culture issue.
Yeah.
When people don't want to speak up, when it's dead silence in the room, we used to say, call a thing a thing. And that's a tough space to be in when you cannot get folks to share, what they're experiencing and feel safe to do so, right?
I want to reiterate something that we touched on here. You can't read your way into being a good leader. In fact, you can't sit in a course your way into being a good leader either. Leadership is more about your actions than it is about your intentions or your knowledge. You can say you're an empathetic and supportive leader, but when you're stressed or under pressure, are you still practicing those same traits? And are you practicing them consistently? Consistency builds trust, and trust builds a safe and open culture in a workplace. And that's what allows a team to thrive. When you show up differently every day, it doesn't support that environment. If you're short with people or closed off to feedback on some days while you're asking for it on others, it can create this kind of mixed message for your people. And if when you're stressed or overwhelmed, you go and cancel all of your one-on-one meetings, this sends a signal to your people. Our time to connect is the first thing to go. And what does that mean about how much I'm valued? And of course, we're human, so we're not going to get it right every single time. But what do you choose to prioritize when things are tough? And what are the first things to go? And if they're connection or patience or curiosity, what message might that be sending to your people? I really also loved the CEO hot seat that Patrice mentioned. And we hear a lot about having a growth mindset as a leader, being willing to admit when you're wrong or being open to acknowledge your failures and learn from them. And this can be particularly tough when our egos are involved. As humans, we're designed to keep ourselves and our perceptions of ourselves intact and safe. And this is where self-regulation comes in. It's really about developing the skills to self-regulate, which requires a lot of practice, not just a mindset shift. So I'll expand a little bit on this in the wrap up. So stick around for that. So one of the things you mentioned is when you can kind of create that culture of care, when you see people, when you even managing them in the way that they need to be managed or want to be
Mhm.
managed, right? Not treating everybody the same or saying, this is how I manage and, have a blanket approach across everybody. Doing all those things, is there such thing as caring too much?
Yes, there is. Caring too much may actually undermine a person's growth, right? And that's when you are like, no, we can do it this way or we can do it that way, and you making adjustments for someone. For example, my beloved baby cousin, who is in her sophomore year of college, calls me and she texted me first and she said that she was stressed out. And I was like, okay, well, let me call and find out what's going on, because I give the world, this is my baby, right? And she says to me, well, I may have to get an apartment. I got to go, I'm not eligible to live on the dorms anymore. And she's getting ready to be 21, right? So you're an adult. And I think I could have said, okay, well, let me call housing and let me find out how we can get you a dorm room, versus no, it is time. You got to get the apartment. You got to learn how to pay bills on your own. You got to do, like all of these things. And it's kind of like heartbreaking on the inside, because it's like, I could just take care of my baby, right? But then she is not going to survive in the real world. She has got to get
Yeah.
out there and she's got to survive and she's got to learn how to navigate things. And so I think we have to be careful with our teams that, we don't, there's a accountability that breeds growth, right? And we cannot, speaking of theory, one of the theories says that you can have a clan type of culture, CLAN type of culture, which is a family style type of culture. And in that environment, sometimes you let people get away with stuff because you care too much, right? But that doesn't breed growth. So essentially, I told my baby cousin she better grow up and get that apartment and do what she got to do.
Yeah, it's that line between, like you said, caring and coddling,
Mm-hmm.
or, caring and like enabling someone not to take ownership. It's
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
how do you balance,
Mm-hmm.
giving them the nurturing they need and also the space to figure things out on their own? So I
Mm-hmm.
totally
Mm-hmm.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so along the way, in your own personal growth, which I think inevitably helps you grow as a leader, what are
Mm-hmm.
the tools that you lean on, or the people
Mm-hmm.
that help you develop?
Couple things. I believe, and I'll just be transparent, I believe in having a great therapist,
Yeah.
which I have. So I almost say I've got a personal board of directors. Okay. So great therapist, great executive coach. I have a slew of good mentors. In fact, somebody asked me one time, how many mentors do you have? A lot. And then I love a good routine. I love a system. And so going to the gym 3 to 5 times a week. Last year I ran a half marathon. I love working out. It just really gives me the energy that I need. And I just do have some really great friends. And then of course, my 2 dogs, who right now is probably tearing up things in my room because I locked them in my room and I was running back to my office. So I'm sure that they have found a way to tear something up, which I coddle. I care too much. There's not enough accountability.
Right, right.
With
Your
those
clan
two.
mentality with the dogs. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Way too much. Way too much. And then, finding space, finding balance. One of the things that I'm loving about this space of growth for me is I used to very much so be the person that works 24/7. I am not that person anymore. And I am really happy to not be that person. I have a good balance, right? When it's time to shut that laptop down, I shut that laptop down, right? And I find myself in my kitchen listening to Stevie Wonder and cooking something delicious and having a good time, right? Which allows me to be a good leader because I'm not overwhelmed or stressed out we believe in working smart, not hard, but smart.
Yeah. You said it. I think having boundaries and balance makes
Hmm.
you a better leader, because in
Hmm.
that self-awareness, right? And noticing, not having to have somebody say like, you were not your best self in that meeting. Like, you
Yeah.
probably have the space, right? To notice that, to
Hmm.
feel it in your body,
Yeah.
when something's off. I
100%.
think we are able to notice things. We're able to regulate our own emotions
Hmm.
when we're not exhausted, when we're not
Yeah.
overwhelmed, when we're not overburdened with
Hmm.
every minute of our day being scheduled or working
Yeah.
all hours of the day and night.
100%.
Patrice mentioned the supporting network that she's built around herself, and I really want to applaud that. We all need support. And this idea that we're supposed to just struggle alone and make it to the top, or even find pride and glory in doing it ourselves, I think we need to rewrite that. Patrice has a great therapist and a great coach and a suite of mentors who she can go to. And I'd encourage everyone to build your own personal board of directors. Think about this as your own career council. Where do you turn when you need guidance? And what roles can each of these people play for you? Who's there to support you? Who can you go to for advice? Who can challenge your thinking around your strategies? And who can lovingly call you out when you're making excuses for why you don't want to or can't do something that's going to move you towards your goals? Who can expand your perspective? Think about people from different lived experiences than your own, different identities, different thinking and problem solving styles. Not all of these questions have to live in each of the people in your council, your board of directors. You can bring together different people to play these different roles for you. And the more you can round out your blind spots with others who you can trust and respect, then the farther that you can go, and you can go faster without burning yourself out from this pure hustle mentality. So, who's on your personal board of directors today? And who would you add? So what's next for you in your growth? What are the things that you would like to see for yourself
Mm.
as a leader moving forward?
I would like to see my team. Let's hit this mark in this next phase with Project Scientist. I would really, because we're starting, we've got a strategic plan, and I just want to be able to see us achieve this goal as a team, right? 10,000 girls, 12 communities across the country, a couple of global communities. I just want to be able to see that vision come to reality, right? And I'd be good. And then Michelle Obama can call and she and I can work on some things, and that's it. And the team kind of knows that joke. They know I'm not going anywhere unless Michelle Obama calls. If she calls, then all of us are going.
Yeah, exactly. Then I will take the call and we'll figure something out.
Yes. Yeah, we'll figure something out. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. You said something to me when we first met that I was so curious about. You said a lot of the skills or the things that make people kind of this genius that you were talking about in the STEM fields or the STEAM fields are inherently feminine, or feminine traits actually
Mm-hmm.
can really help there. So say a little more
Yeah.
about that. I really was super
Mm-hmm.
intrigued.
I think part of the reason why we are not as far as we could be is because we haven't had women at the table. And having women at the table with the things that are inherently feminine allows us to create from an advantage point, right? And I think that can be true in multiple fields, right? Where
Yeah.
having diverse voices at the table, there is a business argument to say that we are advantageous when there are multiple voices in the council of many, right? And I think women in particular I mean, we are the blueprint. We just are the blueprint. Our experiences that are inherently feminine, we are the blueprint. And I think we do ourselves a disservice by not empowering girls to see themselves as genius and to be at the table, right? To be at the table creating the next big thing.
I mean, I think it was just in the last couple of years we got like a female, average female sized crash test dummy in cars being
Yeah.
tested for seatbelts, like
Yeah.
seatbelt safety. It's like, how is it possible that we've made it this far and
Hmm.
still have these things, right? Or medical testing and
Hmm.
and that's both for gender and race, and just
Yeah.
the lack of representation in those studies is because there's a lack of people at the table
Yeah.
making the decisions.
And
So
then the flip side to that too that we have to work on is when we do have our girls who grow up and they go into these fields, that companies are ready to receive them. So we have to begin challenging these systems. So when we think about structural racism, and when I use the term white supremacy, I don't use it in the sense of interpersonal racism. I use it as a social political structure. And in multiple organizations, that structure exists. And so we're sending Black and Brown girls into spaces that are not equipped to fully embrace them and allow them to be their authentic self, right?
yeah.
And then what happens is there is a cycle where there's burnout and girls end up leaving the field. And that happens for women, period, no matter race. And so I think we have to begin to challenge these institutions that they are equipped to really accept diversity, right, in its fullness versus what we're seeing today. If you and I logged off and we went on CNN and New York Times, we will begin to see these attacks against DEI, right, and all these types
Yeah.
of things. So we are in for a fight. I mean, we are in for a fight over the next decade to see, can we really make our world better? It seems like we're taking two steps back.
Yeah, and that's a big part of my mission, and it's part of the
Mhm.
mission of this podcast and the work I do in organizations is like you're asking people to show up authentically at work, but what are you doing to change the systems that tell them
Mhm.
they're doing it wrong
Yeah.
when actually the system is saying you have to do it one certain way? And
Yeah.
so we're very much aligned on that. I think we're very much
Mhm.
aligned on many things except for the running thing. I thought that you and I were like perfectly just right there up until you said you love running. And then I was like, ooh, I don't know about that.
I'm not mad at you. And I am, what's funny is I saw this video the other day where this girl is running and she's like, I'm the fastest ever. Nobody's going to catch up to me. And when you see the video of her, she's running so slow. And I'm like, that is me. I am the slow runner, but I love it. There's so much energy in doing, 5Ks and 10Ks and it's just so much fun. But I'm not mad at it. It's not for everybody. It's not for
Exactly.
everybody.
We can agree to disagree on this one.
Yes, that's fine.
And we can keep fighting for equity
Yes,
for women and people of color. So
yes. Even though we disagree on the running part, that's fine.
I just want to thank you so much for coming on. I want to thank you for the work that you're doing as a little Indian girl. I grew up, my dad was an engineer. And so, those fields are very near and dear to my heart. And I think that we have so much progress still to make, and we're making a lot of progress today. So
yes.
Thank you for doing the work that you do. And thank you for coming on and sharing your story with me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And likewise, thank you for leading in this way and bringing voices to the table. You do a phenomenal job. I can tell that you are a woman of excellence in your craft. And so keep doing this thing. It's working.
In this episode, we talked about how Patrice went from working in a place that didn't see or value her to one that did, and how it propelled her into really thriving in her career, bringing her skills and her passion forward to create the huge impact that she has today. Patrice is a great example of a leader who's balancing empathy and accountability. She cares deeply, and she creates a space for her people to be human at work. But she's also very focused on the goals, and she pays close attention to that line between caring and coddling. Except, of course, when it comes to her dogs, which she's a total pushover for, but I'll allow that. And she does all of this while seeking out and accepting support from others. I think this is the missing piece for a lot of people. Getting over whatever it is that we believe about being supported and shifting our perspective to see just how much more we can do when we aren't trying to do it alone. I mentioned that I'd come back to talking about this combination of having a growth mindset and self-regulation. So as someone who works on personality patterns with leaders all the time, I have so much compassion for why we are the way we are. Based on a unique combination of nature and nurture, we've developed these coping strategies that have gotten us to this point. It could be avoiding conflict or avoiding difficult emotions or taking on too much because we feel like we have to be capable or strong. There's so many of these patterns that you can recognize and acknowledge. And unlearning these patterns requires so much more than reading a book about it or cognitively understanding it. Of course, it's important to understand our patterns and how and why they show up, but then to change them, we have to practice. And this often means going against the signals that our brain and our body are sending us. Don't speak up. It's not safe to go against authority, or don't ask for help. It'll make you less valuable. And then what? We have to recognize when a current situation isn't the same as a past situation and know that it's okay now to change the pattern and push through the discomfort. It's just like working out. The first time you lift that weight, it's really hard. And then you keep doing it, and it gets easier and easier. Great leadership or even great relational skills do not come from reading a book. It's about practicing the thing that feels uncomfortable until it's less uncomfortable. If you know me or listen to this podcast, you probably have heard me talk about the Enneagram. And this is one of those ways that you can identify these patterns because it's a personality system that's based in the deeper rooted core motivations that drive us. I'll link a couple of resources if you want to explore that, but know that any tool or framework that helps build your awareness is great. I've also mentioned 2 books previously that I want to bring back into this conversation. Emotional Agility is a book that can help us navigate the discomfort that we're dealing with internally when we're experiencing emotions and help us build a better relationship to understand what those emotions are trying to tell us. and Difficult Conversations, How to Discuss What Matters Most. It's a book that helps us see how all that internal stuff reflects into our relationships, including the relationships that we have at work. We'll link both of those in the show notes. And as a reminder, just remember that these patterns exist because at some point you really needed them. And they could be the exact strategies that you're leaning on that are holding you back from being a better leader.